Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very, very quick disclaimer that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today, although I will try and skirt around the ending a little bit if possible. So, given that my previous Hammer review was Legends of the Seven Golden Vampires, and given that we're now doing this film, it feels, as I get towards the end of this Hammer review series, that we're kind of fading out with a little bit of a damp squib, rather than building up to any kind of exciting crescendo. But here we have a film called Crescendo, directed by Alan Gibson. He went on to do Dracula 1972 AD and Satanic Rites of Dracula. I want to make very clear, though, that he did not then go on to direct Legends of the Seven Golden Vampires. The responsibility of that was with somebody else. So what we've got here is a story about a young music student called Susan, and she moves to France to stay with a wealthy family who live in a villa in the middle of nowhere, basically. None of these people work. Susan is there to study music and use the materials that are available at the house, but of course, this being a thriller, the longer the film goes on, it turns out this family have skeletons in their closet which will absolutely pop out of the closet with great abandon and put Susan's life in danger. Susan is played by Stephanie Powers, who I remember was in another Hammer film called Fanatic. I vaguely remember that film being pretty good. Now that I've seen Powers in a second film, she's really impressed me, actually. She didn't really linger in the memory after Fanatic, but I think she will after this film. We've also got James Olson, who plays Susan's love interest, a character called George. James Olson went on to be in Amityville 2, the best Amityville film, in my opinion, and he was also in Commando. He was General Franklin Kirby. But long before he was trying to get Arnie back into Special Forces, he was in this film playing a wheelchair-bound guy trying to get into bed with Stephanie Powers, I guess. I'm going to name one more actor from this very short cast list, and that would be Joss Ackland, who plays the butler. Not exactly a household name, but if I said the words to you, diplomatic immunity, well, you'll either get what I'm on about or you won't. But this is a thriller which feels very much like all of the other thrillers that Hammer have ever done, really. It feels like a mashup of all their past works in this genre, the good ones and the bad ones. It especially feels similar to Taste of Fear. We've got a character in a wheelchair who might not actually need said wheelchair. The villa in this film feels like that building from Taste of Fear with the swimming pool in the middle, and I'm sure if I went through all of Hammer's other thrillers, I'd find other similarities as well. I had a little bet with myself halfway through this that the film was written by Jimmy Sangster, and when I went on Wikipedia afterwards, I saw that it was written by somebody else, and I thought to myself, oh, I was wrong. And then a bit lower down it had, Jimmy Sangster rewrote the script just a year before production, and I thought, oh, there we go. This film is not without its merits, but the central love story really kind of flops on its face. And I'm not saying that because one of the two people are in a wheelchair. I saw this period drama in the 90s about this able-bodied woman who romanced a one-legged ex-soldier, and it was a beautiful relationship, really well written and developed, but the love story in this film is nothing like that. The problem is mainly on the George side. I like the Susan character. When she turns up to this villa at the start of this story, I mean, she's young, she's single, she's smouldering, she's ripe for the next hot guy in a wheelchair to just come along and knock her off her feet, so to speak. But George is not that character. He's just really irritating throughout all this. He doesn't have enough personality to woo somebody like Susan, given the fact that he's in a wheelchair. He's whiny at times as well, like when his leg starts hurting, and just when it looks like he's actually won Susan over, he starts doubting himself and being all irritating. I just didn't like him by the end of this movie, I've got to say. And the shame of it is that there are lots of other really good characters in the movie who are carrying George a lot of the time. We've got a particularly good character called Liliana, actually. I think that's her name. She's the maid, and I found her to be absolutely delightful. So this maid is sleeping with George at the start of the movie, mainly because of convenience and boredom on George's part. But Liliana has ambitions of becoming the next Mrs. George and inheriting the property and all the wealth and stuff like that. And she doesn't even try and hide it. She's really forthright about the fact that that's what she wants, and that's the reason why she's sleeping with George. And I found the performance from this actress, Margaretta Scott, highly amusing. Like, I mean, this character basically carries the first half of the movie. And there were times when she was in a scene and I was thinking, don't kill her off here, or I'll be annoyed. And then same in the next scene she was in, I was like, don't kill her off here, I'm really enjoying this performance. Eventually, of course, the film does kill her off, but by the time she does go, she's served her purpose. She's kept us watching this film until the true meat of the story can reveal itself. But there are some good varied characters performing different roles here. We've got the two love interests, we've got the comic relief in Liliana, we've got the dark imposing threat with Carter the butler, then we've got the matriarch, Danielle. She's a character who could go either way throughout this story. So lots of different roles, but it's just a shame that George kind of lets the side down. It's like the old adage, you know, about having a machine, and if just one bolt is loose in the machine, then it can make the entire thing malfunction, and that's what the George character kind of does to this movie. I'll tell you how I would have dealt with him in this. So I would have had him rolling his wheelchair somewhere outside in the courtyard, and he'd be calling out for Susan, and then suddenly, from just out of shot, a machete would go into his forehead, and then the wheelchair would just start bouncing down some steps that hadn't previously been in the movie. That's what I would have done. Just a quick correction, I think the maid's name is Liliane, not Liliane. I'm going to slip that in there because I do get some stick in the comments sometimes about getting names wrong. Now, I was going to move on to say that if it's scares that you're after in this film, I can only think of one moment really that gave me any kind of shiver. So there's a nighttime scene where the camera suddenly pans round and we see that George's wheelchair is suddenly empty, and we know that he was in it just a few seconds ago. So it's kind of like, oh, he's able-bodied, he was faking it, he's actually the evil person we've been waiting to turn up. And I won't tell you whether that's actually the case or whether this is just another ruse on the film's part, but it's a pretty effective moment. I liked that one. The actual villa where all this happens, it's a nice location they found to do the filming, although it feels more Spanish than French, I'd say. And also, the outdoor scenes near the pool feel a little bit artificial to me, like they might be happening in a studio, but I'm honestly not sure. Now, in terms of the ending and the big twist, the big reveal, I didn't see it coming, but at the same time, I've definitely seen this exact twist in several films before, both in thrillers and horrors. It just so happens that I didn't guess it this time, but what's done in the final half an hour of this, it's certainly nothing new. There is this weird moment just before the credits, so I am going to finally go into spoiler territory here, so if you don't want to know how this film ends, I'll give you a few seconds to clear off. 3, 2, 1. So once all the action has finished, George is down on the floor. He's still alive, but he's on the floor. He's been hurt a little bit, but he's all right. And Susan is stood nearby, alive. Well, obviously, if she stood up. And the evil person, who I'm still not going to tell you the name of, they are dead, so everything's done and over. I was expecting at this point Susan to just run over to George, check that he's all right, help him up a little bit, you know, and the implication would then be that maybe they'll figure things out and live happily ever after. But no, Susan just bolts past George, straight for the door, starts running down the lane, and the implication is that she's going to sprint through miles of French countryside to put as much distance between her and George and his house as possible. And it just took me back a little bit, because I thought to myself, have I just misinterpreted their relationship for the last 30, 40 minutes? Because even though I wasn't enjoying their relationship, I kind of felt that Susan was for the most part. She didn't seem to mind the occasional whiny outburst from George, and I kind of felt like, okay, given that George is not the killer, they are going to get together pretty much at the end of this, but to just leave him on the floor, a cripple, to fend for himself and recover from this horrible incident, I guess it gave me one last chuckle. I just found it a little bit weird. There's one more weird thing to mention in the film, which is the dream sequence that we get, this regular dream that keeps coming back. So George keeps dreaming of somebody who looks like him killing him with a shotgun at the same time that he's making love to a woman with no face. It's kind of odd, but we get this several times throughout the movie. Reminds me of that flashback from For a Few Dollars More, where the villain keeps stumbling into a bedroom and seeing two lovers on the bed, and he shoots one or both of them. I can't remember. So yeah, something else, I guess, just for us to puzzle over during the more humdrum parts of this movie. But on the whole, I think that's the right word, actually, humdrum. It's very much a Hammer film that if you're into Hammer, you'll watch once, tick off your checklist, and not really go back to, I would have thought. So normally at this point I would show you the version of the film that I've got, but I don't own Crescendo, and I probably never will. I watched this on YouTube, so you can check this out for free if you want to. It's not terrible or anything. I mean, it's still a watchable movie, but it's just not anywhere near one of Hammer's best. Just a word of warning, though, you have to fiddle around a little bit to find it on YouTube. So if you type in Crescendo 1970 film, it's not immediately at the top of the list. You've got to sort of go down a little bit, and even then it's like buried in somebody's playlist. I think it might be called like Hammer Film List or something like that. But I promise you it's there, and I'm sure it's been there like several years. So you'll just have to fiddle around a little bit. Maybe if you type in Crescendo 1970 film Hammer list, you might have a better chance of getting it straight to the top, so you don't have to like look around a lot. But hey ho, shall we get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this? So we got 1, 2, 2.5 bloody axes out of 5. Average film, and I'm ready to move on to the next one, which will be Demons of the Mind. Catch you next time.